Welcome to the Love Overwhelming podcast, where we believe when people are supported, that hope is developed, and that hope guides people in the next step in their recovery and life's journey. Thank you for being here today with me. I'm your host, Chuck Hendrickson, Executive Director of Love Overwhelming. Today, I'm excited to share with you part 3 of my interview with the Kelso Longview Ministerial Association Severe Weather Shelter Directors. In part 1, we heard why the pastors, why the KLMA came on board and wanted to help and wanted to be a part of the shelter. And then in part 2, we heard about how the neighbors and the community input, including our guests and service recipients, influenced the policies, procedures, and the good neighbor agreement that we followed and that the city of Longview approved. Today, we are just closing up shop with the severe weather shelter that we opened for the bad air quality. We had no reason to believe that this would happen and that we would be open up so soon. However, with the wildfires and the air, we know that there are numerous people that were vulnerable and that had lung issues and that really needed respite from the air quality. So we were glad that we were able to do that. We were able to have a good neighbor meeting after the shelter opened up just this last week, and excited to say that the shelter was a success, that many of the neighbors actually said that they wouldn't even have known that we were open at the shelter unless if it wasn't for the emails and the phone calls that they got of us letting people know. We are very, very excited to be moving forward with severe weather shelter plans coming up here in the next month or so that we'll see that as it's getting colder. So part 3 of my interview with the severe weather shelter directors talks about our upcoming plans, some facilities that we're looking at, and making sure that we understand and you guys understand what a successful shelter looks like to us, both with our service recipients and within the general community and neighborhood. So here we are. Thank you for being here with me today. I hope you enjoy part 3 of my interview with the Kelso Longview Ministerial Association Severe Weather Shelter Directors. So one of the things that I wanted to get out there and share with people is, what does a successful severe weather shelter look like to KLMA and Love Overwhelming? I know we got together, we had several conversations about this, several meetings, even within the greater KLMA. And so I just wanted to give you guys time, a couple of you, just kind of share about what that successful severe weather shelter looked like for us, and going from there.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say the very first piece, or the very first goal for a successful severe weather shelter, was creating a space so that no one died from exposure to cold during the winter. That was really our first and primary goal. And from there, having successful shelter meant connecting with people who needed to come to shelter. And it also meant connecting with our community and our neighbors and everybody who had a piece of this, which really is everyone in our community, to give people a chance to volunteer, to give people a chance to meet those who are living in homeless situations right now and need to access shelter, and to understand who those neighbors are and who those people really are beyond what is maybe put out there on social media and that kind of thing. But to really build connection and to build a better understanding of what's happening in our community, while also providing a vital safety need, among many other things. So that's where I'll start.
Yeah, I'd echo a similar thing. I think just the theme of safety has a lot of angles to it. Obviously, safety for the people on our streets as we provide a place of shelter. But then I think part of what we really were committed to make it a successful shelter too is just safety, and a sense for the neighbors to feel a sense of safety in how we were doing it, and having good policies and procedures and such. So. And then I would just add the value of hospitality, like creating a space of welcome, a space of accessibility where people could come and be cared for, a compassionate space, And so those are a couple values that come to mind for me.
So within this, do you guys think, and maybe you guys can give an example of, did we operate a successful shelter based on no one dying on the streets, the neighbors, and getting people access to services? Do you guys think that that was accomplished this year?
I absolutely think we ran a successful shelter. One of the things that I would add to what's already been said about that is I think a successful shelter looks like a constant feedback loop from the volunteers, from the guests, from community members, and that constant communication. And I think that's one of the things that worked really well this year was we did a lot of learning as we went along with brand new partnerships and trying things in a pretty new way. And sometimes that work was messy. You know, we had to course correct, find ways to adjust and be adaptable. But because I think we opened lines of communication with those who were volunteering, with the folks in the neighborhood, with our guests, I think that gave us a lot of great wisdom, not only for how we could course correct during the actual season of sheltering, but now it gives us a lot of wisdom and data that we can use in planning for the coming year. And I think anytime that you have folks in the community who didn't want that shelter in their neighborhood, who are now able to speak about it in a different way, who we have continued connections with, and who have even gotten involved in this work. I think on a macro level, what we're doing, what I hope to accomplish in this work is not only obviously provide shelter and services that are so needed, but also to help transform the understanding of homelessness in our community, so that folks aren't pointing somewhere else to say those people are doing the work, but they're saying this is my community and I am involved in this work myself.
I would also say kind of an anecdotal measure of success for this year was it felt calm at shelter. Every time I went there, things felt calm. Even when there were, I mean, when you have that many people in one space, particularly for a number of days, you might have a little bit of kind of butting of heads between people. But even in those situations, everybody else remained very calm. And I think our staff and volunteers were able to handle those situations really well because they were calm. And I think that sense of calmness for everyone, for guests, for volunteers, for staff, for the neighbors, was because of all the work that we put in and all of the efforts we made to keep those communication loops going, and to really, you know, be a real presence in that space. It just created this calmness in sheltering, and that rubbed off on guests. Sometimes I would see guests come in kind of hyped up and charged up, and within 10 minutes of being in the space had calmed down and were, you know, eating their dinner nicely and ready to go to bed. And you know, there was a shift when people came in the doors, and I think that was partly due to the work that we put in ahead of time to make that space one of calmness.
Yeah.
The last thing I'd add, I think that this year, one of the success points is that there was a lot of trust building that happened with the community. A lot of again, anecdotally, just in a lot of conversations with people, neighbors, people working for the city, there's been a general just sense that they felt it was successful and that they are, I think, hopefully more open to going deeper in this type of ministry because of that. So I think the trust building that happened this year was a really key part of the success of shelter.
Yeah, I agree, Phil. I think that's the same thing. That's a big success anecdotally, just having those conversations and seeing the support and what can happen when we can all come together with a common goal moving forward. I know that for us, a lot of the success was, you know, not only did no one die on the streets and, you know, the neighborhood, and that happened very well as far as the having the phone number for people to call and making sure that they felt safe, having the volunteers and staff walking around the neighborhood. But one of the bigger things beyond that stuff is that we had 4 households that during that time were able to work with their care coordinators, their supported employment, and their supported housing staff. And with that, we had 4 people that were able to get into housing. And that really did create enough stableness just for the time to be able for the people to come in, work with them, and help them to walk forward in that. Of course, we want people to have severe weather shelter. We know that people are in different phases of homelessness, and we need all of these different ministries. And so what a way to see just that baseline essential, having food and water and a space to sleep that turns into now housing that they've been there permanently and will continue on. So that's an incredible success, in my opinion, looking at the shelter this year or last year. And so with that success, we talked about moving forward. We would want everything successful to be able to go into the 2020-21 season. And so what are the plans moving into this next severe weather season that we're coming upon in the next, I guess, couple months? Although it seems like the rain and cold are upon us now, hopefully it'll be a little bit warmer and give us some break, and then we'll go from there.
I can speak a little bit to what we're hoping to do as far as a leadership model for the shelter. We last year, I think, was kind of an experiment for many of us. I guess it was for myself. It's one of the things I was so grateful for, was the opportunity for folks like me who were passionate about this but didn't know very much to be able to jump in and be able to learn. And I think we did that well together as a team. I mean, the folks on this call, plus Pastor Allison, were able to share that on-call director role. And I think there were great things about that. I think also when you have that many folks sharing the leadership, I think it can be challenging to have a centralized sense of, who's in charge right now. And so going forward, our hope is that we can hire someone who can be sort of the one director, kind of the one-stop shop person to go to. I think that's one of our big hopes. That'll help all of our great hourly staff who are working at the shelter. It will help all of our volunteers to have sort of a common director. And then all of us can, help in that advisory role and continue to support in a lot of the ways that we did this past year. So I think that's one of our hope, is starting to come up with a format for leadership that will allow some centralized guidance and control. So that's one way that we hope to move forward in the future. We've applied for a grant that we should hear hopefully by the end of this month, if we will have gotten that grant, to be able to help pay for that position. So that's one of the things that we're working on right now.
Wonderful. And I know that part of the questions moving forward that we've put out there to everybody is, are we going to be at First Christian Church next year, or are we not? And so is there someone that wants to tackle the building location question?
Sure, I could speak to that. I've been heading up some searches for buildings right now, and First Christian did work well. I think we were able to make it successful, but we also recognized that there were some limitations to that location, that just being closer to schools and such. So for the last couple months now, we've been trying to inquire in numerous directions with churches and city officials and even real estate folks that might have a pulse on places we could lease. And we're casting the net pretty widely at this point, trying to explore other feasible options. One of the challenges we have faced is that there often is resistance to opening up spaces, open up doors for this type of ministry. And for those who are watching, if you do have some leads or some ideas of where we might continue to host this important ministry, please let us know. But we're continuing to pray and look for other opportunities to host this ministry.
So moving forward, there will be a severe weather shelter, but we're not sure if it's going to be at First Christian Church or where the location may be, because we're still looking for another location moving forward. Is there any other plans that we have moving forward into this year? And then I guess specifically we can have a little bit of conversation around COVID, as we know that that's going to alter some plans. And so anything else that you guys have specifically you want to add for this upcoming season?
Well, I know one of the things that Chuck, you've spoken to us about is being able to possibly, we're hoping to maybe get this grant to help fund a full-time shelter manager during the season, but also the possibility of using some funding sources that are specifically related to COVID-19 so that this person could work throughout the year in a COVID response way for this population that we're serving. And I think that there's some huge benefits to that if we are able to bring someone on early and have that part of their position funded by these COVID-19 response funds. That person will probably be the best expert on how to keep folks in the population we serve safe, especially as we go into the fall and winter, which from everything I'm reading and hearing could be a resurgence of COVID-19. So the fact that, the hope is that we will have someone working in that position who will basically be an expert on how to keep people safe, keep people healthy, and then be able to apply all that learning and those skills and the best practices that, we're receiving from guiding organizations to the work we do for the shelter. So I think we're set up well for that. I think we're going to have to get creative with what happens when we need to quarantine folks in a separate space so that they can be safe and that the general population can be safe. So we've got some big challenges ahead. I am hopeful that there will be some continued guidance from good organizations out there, even nationally, locally, to be able to help guide that process.
Yeah, and I know the last part of shelter last year was the very first of the COVID pandemic. We weren't in the stay home, stay safe order at that time, and we were able to mitigate and try to reduce anyone from contracting or spreading of COVID. Thankfully, Family Health Center partnered with us and gave us a space where we could go and use as a quarantine site for anybody who may have symptoms, and they were able to guide us through that, their nurses and everybody. So it was just wonderful to have that partnership. Again, more community coming together, helping out, being a holistic options for people, which is very nice. So moving forward into this year, I suppose there are some needs that are out that we have, and so someone want to talk about what kind of needs there are moving forward for the severe weather shelter.
I mean, I would say that first need that we have that Phil has already spoken to is a need for a space, a need for a location. Our hope is to be a little further from schools this year. Again, none of this would have happened if First Christian hadn't stepped up and generously offered to host that space with such incredible grace and generosity. But if you are a person in the community who has any connection to any kind of space that you think might work for shelter, even if you're not sure, we hope that you'll contact us about that. And I would also say that we will continue, hopefully, working with Love in the Name of Christ as a fiscal sponsor for community fundraising. That's always a need. Really, it is all the folks in the community, hopefully some of whom are listening in on this, who made this year happen. It's not without that funding. We need that funding in order to be able to pay hourly staff to be at shelter overnight, to make sure that everything's running smoothly and to pay for all the costs of shelter. So, and then I guess lastly, I would say we need volunteers. We had such an incredible pool of volunteers, and we can always use more. I think especially if you're the kind of person who doesn't mind getting up for a few hours in the wee hours of the morning, there are a lot of really amazing opportunities to be able to connect with the staff there at the shelter and then get to know our guests. And there's lots of different ways to be involved in that. You can be a person who's doing perimeter checks. So you've got your headlamp on and you're walking the perimeter of the neighborhood to make sure things are going well and being safe. There's folks who can help in serving and bringing dinner to the location to make sure that people have a good meal in the evening and the morning. There's folks who can work on hygiene or who can be in engagement with our guests so that folks have access to safe and healthy bathroom, and they also get that human connection that is such a central part of what we offer in the cold weather shelter. So a physical space, fundraising, and more volunteers.
I think I'd just add to that, Liz, that, you know, it really is helpful when there's people out in the community advocating for what we're doing and even telling the positive stories. And so I know that, I know there's a lot of people out in the community who did a lot of learning this last year and saw things that maybe worked out differently than they anticipated they would. I know even for me on the front end of it, Nick, earlier you were talking about the calm of shelter, and I experienced that. But when we were going into it, there was nothing about it that seemed calm at all. And so we know that we aren't the only ones who experienced that. And so if you're a community member who saw positive things happening, I would hope that you would be telling other people about it in the same way that you would maybe share some of these needs that we've shared as well. I think we're really grateful to have pulled off a successful year of shelter, and I think that speaks to what is possible if we move forward and what we can accomplish in the coming years. And so, yeah, if people can be advocates for that, if people can be telling positive stories, that goes a long ways, because Lord knows there's enough people out there spreading negative stories about everything.
Yeah, and for any of you, if there's a church or a pastor who's watching, maybe they're just not aware, or maybe they want to get engaged or re-engage with the KLMA, the Kelso Longview Ministerial Association, how would a church go about doing that?
One really great way, you know, we've got a central email address for the shelter. It's cowlitz@gmail.com. So COWLITZ shelter@gmail.com. So if you just want to shoot an email and say, hey, I'm a pastor, community member, whoever you are, if you'd like to get more plugged in, that would be a great place to start. And then we can kind of direct you from there. I will say that we had pastors and churches involved in all kinds of different ways. There's no one size fits all way to be involved in shelter. We had some really great folks from Pastor Mark from North Lake Community Church brought his bus many mornings during the winter so that he could use the church bus to transport some of our guests to where they needed to go in the morning. We had a number of folks. I know Pastor Vonda McFadden did that. A couple folks from my church, Sharon and Julian Tuck, did that as well. So that's a great way to be involved. Always need help with transport. There's meals that you can provide. You can have your own fundraiser to raise money for the shelter. You can be willing to rally your folks together to get them trained so they can work for the shelter. There are no end of possibilities for creative ways that your church can partner with us.
That's great. And so what I'll do is we'll make sure that we have links down there, the email address and all that. And we'll also put contact information for who to contact if you do want to make a donation or if you're interested in volunteering. Coming up in the next several months, we'll start having more volunteer trainings come up for the severe weather shelter. There's a process that you have to go through to be able to volunteer, and we're excited to start those up again in the next few months. And we'll figure out, we'll probably have some Zoom options as well as maybe some in-person with some physical distancing protocol in place. So we're at the end of our time here. Is there anything that any of you guys would like to add? Just given the conversation and everything we've been going through.
Yes, one other, oh, go ahead, Phil.
Go ahead, Liz, that's fine. I
was just going to share that I can't speak for everyone else, but I did not step in this work knowing what I was doing. And so I think sometimes it's easy to look at these kinds of collaborative community projects and think, oh, that person, they must be an expert, or they must have some incredible background to know what they're doing, or it really, I think so much of this work is just showing up. So for folks out there who might have creative ideas, risky ideas for how to jump into ministries that our community desperately needs, I would just say you do not have to know what you're doing all the time. Most of the time you probably won't. So that's been one of the great joys of being a part of this team and doing it together, is that I think with that passion that we had, God has been able to use that to help bring something really transformational into our own community.
And I just wanted to shout out to you, Chuck, because you have just been faithful for the long haul. Over the decade I've been here, you've been just consistently compassionate, and even when you've faced resistance from the community, we're just grateful for you, and just recognize that we couldn't have done this without you. You provided a lot of wisdom and training and insight, and so just thank you for all that you've done for this needy population in our community. I'm grateful for you.
Yeah, thank you. And to you guys too. It's been, I can't express my thanks enough, just having you guys come around and support the work and the people that we were supporting. And that's really what's about. So it's been really neat to see that even grow from the beginning of the conversations to where we are now. So thankful to be walking together with all of you in this, and the KLMA and the greater community as well. So thank you guys. Thank you for sharing about the severe weather shelter. We appreciate it. And I know that we'll have more updates, and maybe we'll have another one of these moving forward as we get closer to the severe weather shelter season. So thank you guys.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.